Hello everyone, my name is David LePage and I'm the Artistic Director and Leader of Orchestra the Swan, a professional chamber orchestra which is based in Stratford upon Avon. Today we're going to be looking at the minuet and trio from one of Mozart's most well-known works, his Eine Kleine Nachtmusik. Eine Kleine Nachtmusik means a little night music, and this is a serenade for strings in 4 movements, so for basses, cellos, violas and violins. It was completed in August 1787, so it's a fairly late work. Mozart died in 1791. He wrote it at the same time as he was working on his opera Don Giovanni, but it couldn't be more different in character, actually. It wasn't published until about 1827, but has since become one of Mozart's most popular works. The minuet is a dance form in 3/4 time, so 3 beats in the bar, very much like a waltz. We start with the minuet in the home key of G major, and the trio section is in D major, the dominant key, a 5th above G, and that's usual in the minuet and trio form. The minuet is repeated at the end of the trio, so we have a simple ABA form. We're going to hear a complete performance of the minuet and trio by members of Orchestra of the Swan, who will then talk briefly about their particular parts and the structure of the movement. The first violin, as you would expect, carries the melody all the way through, helped of course by the second violin and viola. The first half of the minuet is very upright in character, while the second half is more lyrical and closer to the trio in its stepwise quaver movements. The trio, as we discussed earlier, moves to the dominant key of D major. This is more elusive writing and could be described as covered. In fact, Mozart writes sotto voce in Violin 1, which is an Italian term and means under the breath or softly. There is some wonderful, unexpected chromatic writing, and it propels the melody into some unusual places. It almost has the feel of a jazz improvisation.
Hi, I'm Catherine, and I played the second violin part. So, in the minuet, the second violin part is largely working in octaves with the first violin part, playing the tune but an octave below, until the last 2 bars of each section when it harmonises the tune. So first I play a 3rd below, an F sharp underneath an A, and then I play a 6th below the tune, which is a B under the first violin G. So from a performance point of view, this means that you have to closely match the note lengths and the attack and the phrase shaping with the first violin part. So in the trio, the partnership transfers, so the second violin is working closely with the viola. There's an undulating line of quavers which create a bed of harmony for the first violin to sail over. The feel is very gentle and lilting and really different from the strident crotchets of the minuet. There's a brief return to playing in octaves with the first violin part in the rising forte tune at the start of the second repeated section, just before the second violin part becomes briefly independent in the transition back to the accompanying quavers. So in music from this period, I'd say that it's really unusual to find a second violin part that works independently for any length of time, or that plays the tune on its own. The role is much more of an accompanying one, so as a second violinist, you need to be aware of who you're working with all the time. It's a really lovely position in a string quartet, absolutely crucial to how the sound of the four instruments gel together. You need to be sensitive but strong enough to step into the foreground when it's called for.
The viola functions as a kind of messenger between the bass and cello and the violins. This is illustrated by the fact that it will often be working with the bass line and then switch to a short burst of melodic writing to complement whatever the violins are doing. Now, Mozart played the viola in chamber groups, so he had a practical understanding of the importance of the viola's sort of go-between role. His love of its melodic qualities is displayed most obviously in the Sinfonia Concertante, which is a wonderful double concerto for solo violin, solo viola and orchestra.
Hello everyone, my name's Nick Stringfellow and I'm Principal Cello of Orchestra the Swan, and I have been for about 20 years, which makes me think I've been doing this a long time now. Mozart was a fantastic composer, everybody's heard of him. And in fact, when we play Mozart in the orchestra in concerts, you can feel a buzz from the audience. Everybody loves this music, it's so exciting, it's always different and always wonderful. Everybody knows the first movement, which goes like this. The most famous composers from this classical period were Mozart and Haydn, and Beethoven as well. And all of them wrote symphonies, and certainly for Mozart and Haydn, every symphony they wrote, and there's very few exceptions to this, one of the movements was a minuet and trio. The minuet is actually a dance form going back to the Baroque period. And it's a very sophisticated, very elegant dance. Little bit like a waltz, but much more upright in character. And the trio would be a contrasting movement. That happens in the middle. So you play the minuet, then you have the trio, and then you always go back to the minuet to finish. And I'm thinking, and I'm sure you are too, of what musical devices you would use to make a contrast. One thing you could do is you could have the minuet in the major key, you could have the trio in the minor key. So if he doesn't do the trio in the minor key, what does he do? Well, he actually modulates to the dominant. It's very close in feeling to the home key, and that's why it's a great key for this trio, because what it does is it gives us a feeling of wanting to get back home. The bass and cello kind of underpin what's going on in the melody, in the first violin and the inner parts. So it's our job to copy the phrasing of the first violin and also to support it. I'm going to be thinking about articulation. So I don't want all these crotchets to sound the same, so I'm going to vary the lengths of them. Also at the end, did you notice this kind of boppy, funky device at the end? That's a hemiola. It was used a lot in classical periods in minuets, and I wonder whether it was the composers just trying to play a trick on the dancers because they were trying to wrong foot them. What I actually did, we said this was in triple time, but in the last two bars, instead of playing 2 bars of 3, I actually played 2 bars of 2. So instead of playing 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, I played 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1.
Is your during this period, Mozart would have wanted us to maintain a rhythmical and harmonic sense of security for the melody, and if you like, the inner sandwich, perhaps the viola part, to be able to sit upon. So the cello and bass are very much, let's use the analogy of a sandwich. We're very much the firm bread bottom piece, where the viola here would be the middle texture, and then the violins on the top would be your other piece of bread, but perhaps a bit lighter, a bit thinner, maybe not such a thick crust, for want of a better analogy. And our role is to keep the harmony as simple as possible, following the melodic line and the dynamic structure. And ending with a perfect cadence that diminuendos. In Mozart, we never play yum pum. We would always play yum thum. So the next section, we have, like I said, a little musical conversation. We then move on to the trio. Now the trio here, we are just playing what we call the root of the harmonic chord that we are in each bar. So our first octaves are Ds. Then we move to A, back to D, Bs, then back to D. But our line is still really important to provide harmonic structure and rhythmic structure, and to follow the dynamics of the melody that is along the top. So generally, as we're looking at, the direction of the melodic line is enforced particularly by the cello bass line that happens underneath. We always tend to play the root of the chord, so the harmony is stable and underpinned, if you like, from the bass up, so that the melody and the music can flow. We are there to really support and enhance everything that the melody asks for. So, I hope you enjoyed your double bass point of view of the minuet from Eine Kleine, and I wish you all the best.
The wonderful thing about this little minuet and trio is that it gives us an insight into the genius of Mozart. He was able to take a well-worn and simple structure like the minuet and trio and do something hugely original and memorable with it, without an audience even realising this was being done. I'm going to leave you with a quote from Mozart himself, which seems to sum this up. He was in fact talking about his piano concertos here, but it applies equally to this piece. He said, "There are passages here and there from which the connoisseurs alone can derive satisfaction, but these passages are written in such a way that the less learned cannot fail to be pleased, though without knowing why."